I've been the best ever since day one when I walked into this company, and I've been vilified and hated since that day because Paul Heyman saw something in me that nobody else wanted to admit. That's right, I'm a Paul Heyman guy.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. Now, from time to time, you may hear me here on the channel exclaim that comic books are the very best storytelling medium in the entire world, and I believe that with every fiber of my being. I do not always express exactly why I think that or why that is so, and I'm going to try and do that today. I truly believe comic books are a special storytelling medium. It takes a lot of the strengths of other storytelling mediums, combines them into one, and it removes or is able to eliminate some of the weaknesses. Now, there are still limitations. You cannot have the moving pictures like you have in movies or television, but there are ways the artists can make the consumption of the story very dynamic. It maybe not as dynamic, obviously, as moving picture, but it can be very, very close. And in many ways, it can be even more exciting because you can dictate the timing of when people get to receive the information. You can slow the reader down. You can speed them up. Like if you try to do that in a movie, and all of a sudden, then you have to go, you know what I mean? In comic books, with a seasoned writer and artist team, you can do all those things. And, quite frankly, you can manipulate the consumer of the product to receive the story at the pace in which you want them to, which will best suit the story that you're trying to tell them. Now, not a lot of writers and artists know how to do that so much anymore. But when it's done well, and when it is done well, I definitely want to highlight it here on the channel. I'm going to use real examples of recent comic books that I think highlight a lot of the things that I think are the strengths of comic books and why it is the best storytelling medium. When it's done well, I think it's peerless. It's even better than a great movie. And I grew up as a movie guy. I still, hey, I love Star Wars, love Conan the Barbarian, The Matrix. There's a lot of good movies out there. But I think all those stories could be told even better in comic books. And if you think about it, like a movie like Star Wars, for George Lucas to get off the ground, he had to invent technology just to be able to film that because he was so limited by technology and what was available at the time. You could have made that story using a comic book or in a comic book 5 years before they did the movie. Same thing with The Matrix. Would have been a little bit different, but you could do all the effects of there using the old pen and ink and colors. You know what I'm saying? And that's why I think comic books are so ahead of their time a lot of times as far as visual storytelling. Now we're going to get into these 5 strengths and weaknesses, or 5 strengths that I think separate comic books from other mediums. Now there's going to be some bleed over, between comic books. You're going to be like, well, you can get that in novels as well. You cannot get all 5 of these in any other medium but comic books. And that's what I think separates. And there is going to be some overlap as far as these things. But I think I'll be able to explain it very well. Now, let's stop lollygagging. Let's get into some of these examples of why I think comic books are great. And if you have not read any of these, I think for the most part, if you get them, you're going to understand where I'm coming from, and you're going to have a greater appreciation for comic books. And you might become a comic book fan yourself if you're not already. Now, let's get in here. As a comic book creator, you're really only limited by your own imagination. You are not limited by budget. You're not limited by technology. Obviously, I went into that a little bit already. You can do anything you want. And I don't only mean you can go to any world that you want. We'll get to that kind of here in a little bit. Or you can, have any fantastical creature. You could get the reader to consume the story any way that you want. Here's a great example in the latest edition of Flash. I believe it was Flash 776. And we have this adventure going on with the Flash, Wally West, and Dr. Fate. And as they're going through the story, the reader of the comic book is having to help them navigate this weird world, and you're churning the pages of the comic book as Dr. Fate is explaining this to you, and you're turning things upside down, and you're knocking people away from them as they're climbing through the panels and whatnot. And it is such a cool interactive experience. You will never get an interactive experience like this with a movie. Certainly, books are an interactive experience. The closest thing I can think of is like Choose Your Own Adventures, and I've seen those on Netflix as well. But it's never going to be quite like this. You can't, all of a sudden, like put the words in a novel sideways or at a slanted angle and keep telling people to turn their book and whatnot. But because you have the pictures that are helping you along with the adventure as a reader, this is a fun and exciting way to consume a comic book. And I think that the creators, Jeremy Adams and Fernando Passarin, should be celebrated for doing something so cool. Now, should you do this in every single comic book? Absolutely not. But for this story, this was a wonderful imagining of how to interact with the reader, tell the story, and tell an exciting adventure. But there are other ways that you can do things like this. There's also the page reveals, as far as when are you doing your big reveals on your pages and whatnot. There are so many exciting ways that you can tell stories within comic books and interact with the reader and get them immersed into your world. Literally, it's not just imagination as far as the pictures. It's the imagination of the way that you're telling the story, how you're having the reader follow the panels and the layouts and whatnot that really bring comic books to another level as far as visual storytelling. Another big selling point for comic books, and I think for some reason this is taken for granted by DC and Marvel, but these characters and these settings are evergreen. The example I'll use here obviously is Spawn. Todd McFarlane has been telling the story of Spawn since the 90s. It's been going on for 30 years. We're over 300 issues in, and the character still has life. We have not had to recast the character. We have not had to recast the actor. There's been some artist changes along the way, and there have been a couple of times when Al Simmons gave up I think it was once where Al Simmons kind of gave up the Spawn legacy to another character. Then obviously they came back and he has it again. But this character lives through the generations. He's not limited by the day that he was created. There's no shelf life on what this character can do or be in the imagination of the writer. For some reason, DC and Marvel really, they don't like the fact that these characters, they don't age. They could literally last for 8 decades without needing to be retired, without needing to be recast. And they keep like, whoa, people don't understand why Batman's not getting older. Oh, I understand. It's because he's Batman and he's a superhero. He's a superhero in comic books. And it makes sense that in one story, when you look at the background, it looks like it's the 1950s. And in another story, it looks like it's the 70s and people have bell bottoms on. It's because the character himself is evergreen. There's no shelf life on these characters and what they can do and what they can represent. Obviously, you get this in novels as well, but you can't do this in movies and television. You have to do it like Bond, where you're constantly recasting the character and he never looks the same. These characters don't need that. Sure, they're revamped every once in a while. When you get a new artist in there or whatever, they want to do something dramatic, so they'll do a little costume change. But the characters themselves, the core components, last forever. They are not constricted by like a human lifetime. They've outlived, in a lot of cases, their creators. And you have obviously Todd McFarlane still working with Spawn to this very day. His original creation, when he went over to Image Comics and started the Image 7. As part of the Image 7, they started Image Comics. I think this is great, and this is one of the real strengths of the comic book medium, is you get to see the characters, you get to see what they look like, but they always in some ways they can stay the same. Now you can do things with them. You can have them, you can change them along the way, but you don't have to. And I think that's one of the things that DC and Marvel just don't understand. And in some cases, it's almost like they're ashamed of their own universes. I know Marvel is the world outside your window. No, it's not. There are mutants in the Marvel universe in the 616. There are Sentinels, enormous robots that hunt mutants in the 616. There's a dude that made a power suit that can fly around. There's an enormous hulking beast powered by gamma rays. It's not the world outside your window. And every time they try to bring those wonderful things in their own unique setting, the Marvel 616, into our universe, it degrades them and it brings them down to our level. I hate that when comic creators have to do that. You see the same thing with DC Comics. DC, essentially their heroes, a lot of levels outside of, like Batman, but a lot of them are like godlike heroes. Their power sets are so high, but they live in that DC universe. Stop trying to bring that universe into our universe. Our universe sucks. I go to the DC universe to escape this, and I don't think DC and Marvel really celebrate that enough. That one of their true strengths is they have this great connected universe where these characters live. And sure, there are some similarities between our universe and their universe. But I can go there and not have to deal with all the shit going on with mine. And it's a nice way to escape. And I do not think that they use that to the fullest. But when they do, comic books are absolutely lights out. When they don't overthink the fact that their characters are evergreen, they don't feel ashamed of the fact that you can have Superman introduced in the 1930s and you can have Superman in the year 20, in 2021 and essentially be the same age. There's nothing wrong with that. Why bring your character down to our level? We're all going to get old and die. We know that. Superman doesn't have to. Another thing that I think is a real strength of comic books is I do think just writers in general have a tendency to be shocking, to overwrite things. Too much dialogue, too much explanation. One of the cool things about comic books is that you have a limited amount of real estate, not just in the fact of the page count if you're doing a periodic comic book, but on the page, you have this wonderful, gorgeous, beautiful art. Obviously, here we see the art from Riccardo Federici from The Last God, written by Philip Kennedy Johnson. Philip Kennedy Johnson is an up-and-coming writer. He's doing a really good job on Action Comics right now. I just highlighted that a few days ago. Look at all this wonderful action art that's in here, this wonderful storytelling that's going on. He knows that he cannot cover all up with words, so he has to be very limited as far as when he's going to use his dialogue. It has to be impactful. It has to have a purpose. You cannot have filler in here, because you're filling it when you have filler in here, it's basically destroying one of the biggest selling points of comic books. And I think that this limitation on the writer makes them good writers that understand that they don't want to destroy what the artist has created. Good writers work within that, and they learn to be more brief, more to the point, and tell their stories in a better fashion by not getting over explaining. Let the pictures explain a lot of this stuff. Let the artist be a storyteller as well. And it really, in theory, you shouldn't have any filler in a comic book for the most part. Now, we do have a lot of story decompression right now, so this isn't being used to its fullest in a lot of cases, in my opinion. But when it is, it just makes that comic book just pop, pop, pop as you're reading page of page of page, and it's all impactful and it's all really important. That's why comic books, to me, a lot of times nowadays don't seem so great, is because there isn't enough important stuff. In this story, particularly in The Last God, this is a sweeping fantasy epic telling the story of a quest that's already happened, that apparently something went wrong, and then a new quest that's happening, and they're essentially 30 years apart, I believe. 6 pages in, you're there and you're in the story. He's told you what the world is, what the quest represented, the belief of how it went the first time, and you get right into the story because Philip Kennedy Johnson was limited by the real estate in which he had to introduce his world. And he had to be more clever, more creative on how he's going to introduce key elements and get you into the story without you being bored and just pop, pop, pop and get that story moving. And I do think the limited real estate and the fact that you have this wonderful art that is one of the major selling points of these stories, really, for the good writers, it challenges them to take their story craft to a higher level, to work with the artists themselves, to let them be the storyteller, but also to be more brief, to get to the point, make sure that dialogue has a purpose, it's impactful, and if you don't need it, you get rid of it. And I think that is one of the really, to get to the 6th page in this Last God story in a novel, it would probably be 3 chapters. We're talking like 60 pages probably. And it would be beautiful. It would be great. And I'm sure Philip Kennedy Johnson would love to write the novelization of it. But I just think for really awesome, interactive, just visceral storytelling experience, comic book has it really nailed. The next thing I want to talk about, this example is going to be from Jonathan Hickman's East of West. And in a lot of cases, maybe not so much on DC or Marvel, but if you're a comic book creator and you're creating your own universe here, you have like unlimited creative freedom. Nobody, if Jonathan Hickman took the pitch for East of West to a movie studio and said, I want to make this weird Romeo and Juliet love story involving death and then 3 vengeful other members of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse coming after him, and then there's like a kid, and there's all these weird politics going on in this post-apocalyptic U.S. with all these political overtones, they would tell you to get the hell out of there. It would be far too expensive and no one would be interested in the story. If you pitch this to Netflix as a streaming show, they would tell you you were out of your mind. Nobody would be interested in this story. And I think if you pitch this to a major publishing house as a novel series, they would tell them to go pound sand. But because comic books are a lot smaller audience, it has the comic book readers have a different expectation as far as their storytelling. They like things that are more out there, things that are more creative, things that are just absolutely nuts that you would never see anywhere else. Like if you go to and read the Infinity Gauntlet and you read that comic story and then you see what was adapted into the movie, the comic story is absolutely bonkers. It's nuts in comparison, and it's far more enjoyable, in my opinion. Obviously that was done by Marvel. But you would never be able to put that in other mediums because it's too insane. And, Jonathan Hickman's East of West is far too involved. It's really complex. It's multi-layered. And you have these weird, really strange, weird, wonderful characters that are going through here. No other medium would have ever allowed him to create this universe, ever allowed him to bring it to life. He would have had to have written the novels and sold them on his own. He would have had to, being direct to consumer kind of thing in self-publishing because no publisher ever would have done this. But in comic books, because you have Image Comics out there, you have Boom, you do see DC kind of getting into some of the non-superhero stuff. You have IDW, you have all these opportunities. If you've built up a reputation, you get an opportunity to build one of these weird, crazy universes, and you can make these super strange stories and play them out for 4 years or 5 years. And that creative freedom it breeds better stories. And perhaps East of West will be adapted one day to a streaming show. It would have to be something like that. I don't think you could do it in movies. But when they do it, it's going to lose everything unique and cool about it. Because it's too strange to adapt to other places. And the creative freedom would be sucked right out of it. And that's one of the reasons that it's so cool to be in comic books and read these really interesting stories, is there's no limitations as far as their imagination, but also what they can do with it. You're not going to be constrained by that creative oversight a lot of times that you would feel some other places. Now, my last example, it's kind of all building up to this one. I think the world building opportunities in comic books are phenomenal. And it differentiates itself from books and movies because you are not constrained by budget, but also in books, you're not constrained by the written word. In this example from the the Miranda brothers from We Live at Aftershock Comics. And you get a brief glimpse of the world right here. You see the costumes, you see the setting, you see the creatures, you see the little boy in the superhero outfit, you see the other little boy on top of the what appears to be a robot. If you read the story, you'll find out that's an enormous gorilla. If you wanted to explain this in a novel, it would take you forever to properly flesh this world out, because you would have to describe it, all the layers and all the wonderful colors and the way that the costumes look and the way that the creatures look and whatnot. In comic books, you can build the world one image at a time. You can show that this is a dilapidated post-apocalyptic universe because you can see the buildings in the background that are overgrown with plant life and vegetation. You can see that it's a dangerous world because we have these creatures up there that look something like lions, but they've obviously evolved at some point. They've got these extra things hanging off of them, and they look differently. They're much brighter now. You see this guy's got these goggles on. He's got this really big rifle. Obviously, it must be a very dangerous place. And it's just cool, all the things that they're able to do without saying a word, without writing a word, and that you're able to do in here, and you're not constrained by the budgets. If you try to put this into a movie or a TV show, you would have to dumb it all down to that medium. And that's why comic books are so glorious. You don't have to dumb anything down. There's an expectation that the reader and the comic book consumer is smart enough that they'll be able to understand the story and be able to immerse themselves in that universe. And that's really something you can do it in books, but it takes you so long to build up a world like this that is completely unique. There are certain things that you can recognize from our world, but it's completely unique and unto itself. And that's one of the things that it infuriates me when I see comic book writers limiting themselves to like our universe. We all live here. We see plenty of shows on television, and movies that are set in our modern day universe because the budget, the budgeting is so much easier. You dumb it down, bring it into our world, and tell the story there. Why limit yourself when you have comic books? You could do anything you ever wanted. I understand there are certain stories maybe you want to tell within our universe, but it's so much more fun and it's so much more expressive, and it's such a better use of the comic book medium to go out there and create these worlds with these different rule sets, these new cultures, and the way that these characters have adapted, and these new threats and all these things, and let it play out on the page for your readership to go in there and just explore it and feel it. And it's just a visceral experience to get in there and see something you've never seen before and know that you love it as soon as you get in there. And I loved We Live, 2 or 3 pages in, once I realized kind of what they were building of the Miranda brothers. And this thing is fantastic. If you have not read We Live, I cannot recommend this high enough. There's a sequel coming up very soon. It's just a gorgeous, it's gorgeous to look at, but it is a deadly, very dangerous world, and the stakes couldn't be higher. And I'd rather see these stories play out here than have to see it, brought down to our ugly, disgusting world that we got right now where no one likes each other. Man, the world building opportunities in comics are just amazing. Look at this page. It tells you so much just in one picture without one written word. It tells you everything you need to know. And you just, you don't get these opportunities. And if you get them in television, movie, the budgets are so enormous that you would have no creative freedom to do any of this stuff because you'd have like a 250, $500 million budget, and you have all these producers telling you how to make your product and the story that you're able to tell. And trust me, they wouldn't have taken any of the chances that the Miranda brothers were able to tell in this wonderful world they built, or the chances that Jonathan Hickman was able to take in that wonderful creation in East of West, that another post-apocalyptic universe that he's created. And you'd never be able to take two characters like the Flash and Dr. Fate and tell that story, in that Flash comic. If you want to do that on the big screen nowadays, you'd have to have Batman in there. You can't do it without Batman. You wouldn't be able to justify the price. But in comic books, you can do it with Flash, a B-level character, and Dr. Fate, maybe a C or D-level character. Certainly very powerful, but, not somebody that everyone knows. Comic books they're just so amazing, and I hate to see them. It feels like they're getting more and more dumbed down by the day, but there are so many great examples of people utilizing the medium to its fullest, taking the opportunities to really go out there and use their imaginations to their fullest, tell the coolest stories possible, take advantage of the fact that these characters, they don't age. You could tell a continuous story that was literally set in a 3-week time frame, and you could tell it over 30 years. And that's cool. You could do that in books too, but it works better in comics, in my opinion. I really like the fact that there are constraints on the medium, because you can't go out there and bendis your fucking comic book and just word vomit all over this wonderful artwork that your creative partner is done. There has to be some collaboration. There has to be some give and take. There has to be some ingenuity on the part of the writers to highlight and accentuate the wonderful storytelling that's happening in the pictures, to line up with what's happening in the dialogue, to use that valuable real estate on the page where you have an opportunity to use dialogue to make it matter, to make it impactful. And I think that brings out the best in the best writers, in my opinion. I hope that I have explained my love for comic books, why I think this is the very best storytelling medium in the entire world. I hope you love comic books as much as I do. If you are new to comics or you're not sure yet, I hope that I could help you. Every week we do talk about the best comic books of the week, where I try to highlight the comics that are doing the things that I think make comic books amazing. We do our retrospectives for some older comic books that really have wonderful comic book storytelling and really utilize the medium to its fullest. And if you're a comic fan and you love comic books as much as I do, I want to say thank you. If you're new to the medium, I hope you give it a chance and you go out there and you find the best examples that you can find, rather than going out there and reading some of the just crap that's out there. That's just, the dumbing down of the medium is just really frustrating. But I hope you're along for the ride, and I hope I've been helpful to highlight some of the things that make comic books absolutely amazing.